All right, great. So, hi everyone. Very excited to be able to share some of my thoughts with you today. If you have questions as we go, I'll keep an eye on the chat. Otherwise, I'll leave some time at the end if you have particular questions. But this is meant to be a conversation. I know usually these workshops, or more typically these workshops, are very scientific heavy. So today we're taking a very different approach. We're going to take a step back and think about our career, and I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned and some things that I've learned from my peers that have helped me a lot in my career so far. So let me tell you about my background. I think that's helpful, gives you a little context for the advice I'm going to give you. So I did my undergrad at Princeton. I did chemical engineering and material science engineering. I had a wonderful experience there. It was very, very challenging, but everything seemed available and open to me. And it was a really, really exciting time. After I finished Princeton, I got recruited into a consulting firm for a year in Manhattan. So it was a management consulting firm, and it was exciting. I got to travel a lot. I learned how to make really, really sharp PowerPoint presentations. And it was a really far departure from 20-hour problem sets and Fourier transforms and lab work. And so it was a really, really nice break for me. And I always encourage people to consider taking these sort of left turns in their career. But, within 6 or 9 months, I looked around and I really didn't see anyone I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I decided that the right path for me was to go back to grad school, to Old Stemler Hall at University of Pennsylvania. I don't know if we have any Penn people on the call. But I did my master's and my PhD with Rob Mock in orthopedic tissue engineering. So I spent a good amount of time looking at bone, actually. And while I was there getting my PhD, I was really focused on getting back out into industry. I knew I didn't want to be a professor. I grew up in the Bay Area. I lived in the startup world. My parents started their own companies. And so I was really clear from the onset, I really wanted to work in industry. And so to really empower that, I worked at the Penn Center for Innovation, which is the tech transfer office, reviewing potential patent disclosures and working with PIs to figure out what their patents might look like and how we would write them. And it gave me a really, really good crash course in patents, and also started to give me some experience with things like working in teams and deadlines, which is something that kind of you do in grad school, but you don't always get a really good opportunity to do. So after my time there, I jumped right into, as I was hoping, a startup. So I joined a company called Dysgenics. I was the third employee, and we grew that company from a very vague scientific research idea into global clinical trials for a product to treat low back pain. And in that 10-year span, I really had the opportunity to try a lot of different roles at the company, from regulatory to lab operations to, everything under the sun, because that's kind of the major benefit of working at a small company, right? You get to do everything and wear all the hats. Um, the downside perhaps of working at a small company, and we peaked at only about 35 people, is that we did have some internal challenges in terms of management operations. And after about 10 and a half years, a number of us departed, and there was a lot of lawsuits that ensued due to some pretty bad behavior that needed to be addressed in the courts of law. And so that's a journey that I obviously can't talk a lot about. You can Google my name and the name of the company, and there's lots of press about it. We got a lot of coverage just because it was quite an outrageous situation, but I'm not open to talk about it too much, unfortunately. Legal stuff is never fun. Hopefully today I'll teach we can talk about how to avoid that completely, because it's no fun at all. But what I decided to do after that journey, that part of my career, was I set up my own business. And right now, what I do is I offer consulting and advisory services to early stage startups, very specifically in the cell and gene therapy space. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now, and business is booming. I love it. And it's really where I am in my career today. Okay, so the field, as I mentioned, the cell and gene therapy, it's an extraordinary field. It encompasses cell therapy, which is where we use a cell as the drug product, tissue engineering, which is, where you combine some sort of biomaterial or matrix with a cell, or just pure gene therapy, which is where we've honestly seen the most in terms of approvals in the United States. We had 7 approvals last year with another, I think, 14 expected between the US and Europe this year. There's money pouring into the field. It's a really, really exciting place to be, and we're starting to make headway in conditions that were previously completely intractable. The definition as put together by the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine is that we intend to augment, repair, replace, or regenerate parts of the body. So it's really kind of sci-fi level medicine. It's really cool to be a part of. And this Alliance for Regenerative Medicine is an industry alliance that does a lot of lobbying work and actually is one of the reasons we have, for example, the 21st Century's Cure Act, which has really enabled a lot of these products to be expedited through the regulatory pathway. And we can get a lot of these products to patients much quicker than we would have otherwise. And frankly, there's just a lot of employment opportunity here. So for me as a consultant, I have a lot of different companies at my disposal. Back in 2022, the Alliance had identified almost 1,400 different developers across the world, and not just in the US. So I work a lot with groups in Asia, in Japan specifically. I have a lot of experience there, and in Australia, and I've started doing some work in Europe as well. So it's interesting to work globally. There's different regulatory pathways, there's different reimbursement implications across the world, but it definitely makes it very, very interesting. And the bottom line is there's fantastic science happening everywhere. And so there's great startups that are being developed, all around the world. But one thing that I really grappled with when I was separated from my last employer was, as I looked around, there were just not a lot of women leaders. At my company that I worked for previously, all the executives were men, all the board members were men. I never had a woman above me. It was my first job, and so I really kind of had gotten thrown out into the wind, if you will. And I hadn't talked a lot about my experiences with sexual harassment and gender discrimination. I was kind of ashamed, to be honest. I thought it was my fault, and I thought it was weird, and I thought this is just how it is. And as I started bringing up my story, once I got the confidence to talk about it, I was surprised how many other women were open to talking about it once I brought up my story, and how many similar experiences were out there. And, I sort of thought to myself, okay, well, what can I do, my little sliver, to try to impact this? And what I was experiencing was those conversations were the most important thing to me at that moment, sort of making that connection with other people, realizing I wasn't alone, and learning ways to cope with them. That was really valuable for me. So what I started doing is a webinar series called I Wish I Had Known. And in this series, we host different women from industry, from academia, from both. Actually, there's a good sliver of these people, you might know some of them, who have been both in industry and in academia. And we take an hour once a month or so, and we host one of these women, and we just kind of hear their stories and open up the floor to allow them to express the things that they've learned and the things they wish they had known, because we don't have a lot of opportunities to just speak candidly, especially to leaders and executive level people. And that's been a really amazing opportunity for me to learn, and I think to support some other people in the field who were struggling, and it's been a great community to build. So if anyone's interested, please feel free to join. It's a great monthly session. So, in these discussions, I've definitely heard a lot of fantastic advice and stories. And so what I wanted to do today is go through some thoughts and advice of things that I've learned or things that I've heard from all of these women in the webinar series. The focus today was around burnout. And I think burnout is a phrase that's tossed around a lot, but it is something that I see so many people in my space, and I would say maybe especially women, experience. And I actually looked out the definition. I looked up the definition because I was curious to see what the official definition was. And the World Health Organization has a definition, which I thought was interesting. But basically, it's about stress that has not been successfully managed. And it's characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. So feeling super tired all the time, increased mental distance from one's job. So kind of starting to feel alienated from it. feelings of negativism or cynicism. I know I've felt that before in bad situations. And of course, all of that leads to reduced professional efficacy, aka you're not doing a good job if you're burnt out, right? And it's not fun. It's not fun for you. It's not fun for your employer. And I was extremely burnt out in the last few years at my previous job. And I don't think I was even aware that I was burnt out. I just thought this is how it was supposed to be. And so it's not how it's supposed to be, I can now say very, very solidly. It's actually really possible to enjoy your job. I think it just takes a little bit of proactive work, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so some things I want to start with that I personally have learned. Um, when you think of your career trajectory, there's two ways to let it sort of evolve, right? One is to let your company or your institution or your PI really guide the activities. Specifically in industry, we always have an annual review. That's like a really big part of our compensation and our bonus. And so there's a lot of emphasis and stress around that annual review. Some universities do something similar. Um, and the question is, is that a good approach? It's an easy approach. It's a natural approach, and I dare say many people take this approach, but I'm going to offer that it's probably not the greatest idea for you. And the reason is because the goals of a company or an institution are not the same as your goals. They're in fact very different. And if you let that company or institution guide where your career goes, there's a good chance it won't be something that brings you happiness. So the goals of a company are, one, to make money for shareholders. Don't ever forget it. That's the point of a company. That's why people start them. It's to make money, and it just don't forget it. I mean, you can have other goals. You can be excited to treat patients, but at the end of the day, it is just a money thing. And the company wants to meet their corporate milestones that they've told the board need to happen. Probably a PI is not so different, right? A PI has certain milestones they need to hit for their grants or for their progression in their career. Those are the company or the PI's goals, not yours. And what the company or the PI wants to do is to staff people on mission critical roles. So they may have a project that is super boring, but for whatever reason is mission critical. Guess what? They're going to push you onto that because that's what they need to see. And they want to work at a pace that achieves their timelines. So it's not what you can sustain and what's healthy for you. It's what the company needs, and they can continue to push you, especially if it's like a toxic work environment, to the point that you really burn out because they have their timelines that they want to meet. Um, the flip to that, of course, is we all should have our own goals, right? I mean, we'll take the first one, money. Yeah, we want to make money for our own families. Like, let's just be real. You want to be able to go on vacation or buy a new car or, send your kids to the summer camp they want to go to. That is a real thing, and I don't think we should be ashamed to talk about it. And you want to meet your personal career milestones, right? There are things you want to achieve. You want to submit that first regulatory filing. You want to get that high profile publication. You need to figure out what those are and make those the focus, not what the company wants to achieve, but what you want to achieve. And you want to work on projects with people that help you thrive and help you feel excited. This is possible. I wish someone had grabbed me like 7 years ago and told me that a lot of people really enjoy their job and you don't have to trudge along and be miserable. In fact, you shouldn't. And if you're in a job and you're miserable, it doesn't mean you have to like quit and move to Tahiti, but could you look around and shift what you're working on and find other people? And could you find an executive coach and sort of change the way you're approaching some things? You deserve to be happy at work. And you shouldn't just be strung along by, the corporate milestones and objectives and timelines. So I really want to empower all of you guys to consider that as you evaluate like your day to day. And to build on that, this just keep swimming phrase, I remember it prominently in my chemical engineering class at Princeton. One of my friends would say this all the time. And I think there's a time and a place to just keep swimming. Perhaps chemical engineering undergraduate program, that's the time to just keep swimming. But when you're in your 20s and 30s and you have a job and a life and you have independence, I think there's also really a lot of moments where you need to take a pause and not just keep swimming and really make sure you're diligent about identifying your specific and measurable personal goals. And I had one of my speakers lay this out really beautifully, and she said that she likes to every 6 months or a year, she'll spend, I mean, 10-15 minutes and write down something she wants to do in a month, something she wants to do in 6 months, and something she wants to do in 5 years. And then you keep going back to that. And I remember her story. She was saying she was so surprised that just by writing stuff down, she was finding the things that she had written down as a 5-year goal to start happening in a few years, or a 6-month goal to start happening in a few months. Just manifesting and making real the things that you want. For her really, really helped. And I started doing this as well. Definitely in my transition phase between my last employer and my current company. I really took some time to think about what do I want in my day-to-day life, at work and at home. What are my priorities? What do I want to achieve? And then I started making decisions to ensure that those things would happen sort of subconsciously, right? And so I think it's a really important step that it takes a little bit of discipline, but even 5-10 minutes can really make an impact on your happiness. And make sure you just revisit it. It could be your birthday, New Year's, I don't know, first day of the quarter, some sort of moment when you kind of reflect and take a minute to look around and not just keep swimming, but really lift your head up and say, wait a second, like, is this working for me? Am I happy? Like, what could I change to make happier? What could I do? I think it's really important. And so since you guys are all stuck with me right now, let's just take 15 seconds, low stress, and just think about like what is one thing that maybe you want to do in the next 6 months. It could be, you know, reading some books. It could be writing an SOP. I don't know, personal. It could be something at work. Um, but I think it's important to set your goal on that. My goal recently was to make it through a whole ballet class because I used to be a dancer, and I achieved that faster than I thought, and it's felt great. So let's just take a minute and think about something. And then if you're open to it, I would love it if you popped it in the chat, so that, we can see what other people are putting as their goal for 6 months. I see one person wrote finish manuscript. Yes, that's a good one. And that could be very challenging. Running my first marathon. Ooh, I love that. That's wonderful. What other goals do people have? Hiring my first technician. Yes. Any other goals that people have? Graduate a new student from the lab. Excellent. And finish the data analysis of my grad school project. Ooh, that's a good one and hard to, sometimes that could be hard to go back to. Analyzing data to meet abstract deadlines. Fantastic. Great. See, so now we've identified some very tangible goals, and you can feel really good when you accomplish those, right? It's like an easy serotonin hit to say you've done these. Um, Analyze data to meet abstract deadlines, present my thesis proposal, write that paper. A lot of paper writing, yes, indeed. That's great. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing I want to touch on a little bit is title. I have very strong feelings about title. There was a phase where it was like the whole lean in phase of corporate theory. Um, and I really reject that. I don't think you should lean in. So here's an example. Let's say you're a senior scientist, you perform your job really well, you're a team player, you're hardworking, all of your deliverables are spot on, and you go to your boss and you request a promotion, and it's denied. And so you think, okay, I'm going to start doing the extra work. I'm going to lean in. I'm going to expand my role. I'm going to get recognized for what I do. Um, and truthfully, I think this is a very dangerous road, because what ends up happening if you do more work than your role is that you're relying on goodwill to maintain your position. So this happened to me. I was doing way more than my role. And as soon as I wasn't in good favor, all of those roles were cut away from me because it wasn't officially my job title. And I never got paid for them because it wasn't my job title. And so you end up being in a situation where you really need to make sure you trust that there won't be a power imbalance. And power, corporate life is about power and juggling that power. And there are things we put in place like title, like reporting line to manage it. And if you work outside of those structures, you need to be ready to fight an ugly fight if things go poorly. So, always happy to talk about a case by case basis. You can reach out, happy to talk to you about it, or you can work with your executive coach. But if you start leaning outside of your job description, be careful and don't do it for too long, because you could get yourself into a sticky situation. Now, that is in terms of what you're doing for your employer. You should always look for opportunities to educate yourself, to do things that make you a better person and better at your job. This is really around the work that you're giving to your employer, and you need to be really, really careful about that. Okay, now toxic workplaces. I'm sure nobody on this call has ever worked at a toxic workplace, right? It's just me. Like, probably not the case. Sadly, human nature, people get nasty, and especially when two things are involved: one, money, and two, science people care about. We're scientists. We really care about the work we do, and most of us will think about it on the drive home and in the shower and on the weekend because this is how our brains work. We really care about the work that we do. And all of these big emotions can lead to what is colloquially called a toxic workplace, which, that can mean different things, but generally it means there's big emotions and people are not happy. And people are getting worked up over things. And it happens and it stinks. So if you're in that situation, which I hope no one is right now, but sadly you will be at some point in your career, I offer basically three options for what you can do. Having gone through it and worked with and spoken with a lot of people who have been in similar situations. So the first option, and I'm going to offer you this, and you're not going to listen to me, is to leave. Just leave. Just just leave. Like, the company will go on, and you won't believe me in the moment because I didn't, but the company will go on. Companies by definition are made of a lot of people, and if it's not working for you, for whatever reason, however you define toxic, I want to give you the agency to leave. You probably won't. It's gonna take you a long time, but that is the option, the first option on the table. The second option is to tolerate it. Tolerate it. I have recently spoken to three different women who are contemplating leaving a toxic workplace. They've been tolerating it for a very long time, and it's taken a toll. It is a valid approach, and sometimes there are reasons you want to stay. Maybe you're the inventor. Maybe you're the founder. Maybe you can't afford to quit financially, or maybe there's no other job that you can take on within a 50-mile radius and you can't move. Maybe you need the health insurance. So there are reasons that you tolerate a toxic workplace. Um, and in that case, there's an option three, which is to go to human resources or to go to lawyers, assuming that that toxic workplace has some sort of illegal behavior. And, the US does have some protections in place for employers, for employees. See, I even said it. But at the end of the day, it is actually all those laws are really more for the employers, if we're being honest. That's who's lobbying for these laws. There are people fighting to make it more, better for employees. But it's very hard for an individual to go up against a large institution or a university. And it's just terrible if it gets to that point. I will also say that I learned that the legal system is there to enforce the word of law, not right or wrong. It doesn't say what's right and what's wrong morally. It is there to make sure that whatever law was put into place is followed. And that's very difficult when you're in a lawsuit that's very personal and you feel morally wronged. It's very hard when it is boiled down to words on a page of, the order that you filed, the papers was wrong, or, whatever. It is not about right and wrong. It's about the word of law. And it's a really brutal process to go through. It's expensive, it's emotional. I sincerely hope nobody ever gets to this point that you have to go to a lawsuit. I think the other thing is HR, that's a tough job because yes, they're there to protect the employees and to hear about problems, but really, they're also there to protect the company. They're never one-sided. And so you really need to think carefully about how you're leveraging your HR relationship and think about their role and what they need to be successful. If you're at option 3, this should be like the last, the last resort. I mean, I hope you take option 1. Um, but if you have to get to option 3, it's there. It's hard. I will say, in any of these cases, get a therapist or get an executive coach. I can't believe how many people's professions out there are just intended to help us work through these hard situations. Every situation that you go through has someone else has gone through it before. There's probably books written about it. Get somebody that is experienced and that can help you manage these situations. And even if you're in a toxic workplace, stuff like how to manage your nervous system overreacting, how to get back to a point that you can sleep, tools for self-awareness. I mean, we're at an age post-COVID where therapy is the norm and people are really aware of mental health issues, and we know it impacts our ability to do work. If you are finding yourself spinning, you're having spinning thoughts and feeling really depressed, burnt out, get some help. There's a lot of options out there, from inexpensive like online options to therapists to, wildly expensive executive coaches that you can more often than you'd think, you can get your institution or company to pay for. Um, so get a therapist or an executive coach. It's my biggest piece of advice. So let's say you are ready for a change in your career. I've spent a lot of years interviewing people and talking to young people as they consider, what their next step is. And I think there's some important questions that is important for you to ask yourself when you have that fork in the road. The first thing, and this is often something, if I just have a networking call with somebody, I'll ask them, what do you love about your job? Let's start by focusing on the positive. So maybe you love asking questions and getting surprising answers. Maybe it's the hunt that you love. Maybe it's the manual labor. Maybe you love, the hours in the lab when it's quiet and peaceful and it's all under your control, and you love working with your hands and answering questions no one else knows the answer to by yourself with your hands. Maybe you're a people person. Maybe you love the relationship you built with your lab mates and joking around with them and having lunch with them and, sitting down and solving problems together. That's an important thing to recognize. Or maybe you really care about a bigger, higher impact. Like you really are excited to know that one day your patient will be treated with your product. And that sort of aspirational goal really wakes you up in the morning and helps you get through the tough times. So for me, funny enough, I'm number 3. I'm a people person, and I actually love meetings, which is weird. I don't know. I love being in meetings with people. I get energy from other people. My kids tease me that my job is to talk to people on Zoom. That's basically my job. And so, as I was designing this role, I recognized I really liked working with teams and with people. And so advisory is a key phrase in my company definition because it's the thing that I like to do. So I think that's a really important thing to define in your head. And of course, the flip to that, what don't you like? It was easy for me to identify some things I didn't like about my former role. I also was able to identify some things I didn't like about graduate school. Grant writing, not my forte, don't love it. And so, also identifying what those dislikes are, I think are important. And then, you're always going to have to do stuff you don't like to do, sure, but if you can try to minimize it, it could make for a happier day to day. And then I think there's some practical things that we need to consider. Where do you need to live? So, does your partner have a good job in a city and you want to be there? Or maybe you want to have kids soon and your parents live in a certain town and you want to be nearby. Sometimes we don't talk about these things. It's like, oh, these are basic or whatever. But the truth is, like, you're at work during the day, but you also have your evenings and your weekends, and there's other parts to your life. Maybe there's a hobby that you really care about, and you want to be near whatever the hub of that is. I mean, these are real things, and frankly, prioritizing those can really lead to a better balance in your life. There is the push towards remote. I think remote working has its place, but I think in the first, phase of a career, remote working is not great because you do absorb a lot through osmosis, through bumping into people in the hallway. A lot of maturity in the corporate world is understanding how to handle difficult people situations. As you progress in your career, you manage more people, you're higher up. Those tend to come out more in person, and so there's more learning opportunities. So, if you're going to take a remote role, be prepared to travel a lot, go to the office once or twice a week. You should want to do that. That's good for your career. And when things get hard too, you want to have some sort of rapport with the people around you that you're struggling with. So it's really, really important to think about, where you want to live. And then finally the salary question. So, it's easy to be like, oh, I am going to finish grad school and I'm going to go work for private equity because I want to be rich. Um, I have some friends that did that, and guess what? They work, I don't know, 100 hours a week. They never see their family. They never work out. If that's the lifestyle you want, then you can get that salary. But your salaries can often be commensurate with your effort, and sometimes more money is not richer, right? Sometimes richness is being able to take a 3-day weekend and go mountain biking with your friends. That's something you need to figure out for yourself. No one can answer that for you. But I think having a good grasp on what richness is for you can help guide you towards the right situation and the right salary. Yes, industry salaries are typically higher, but you deal with a lot more crap, and sometimes you deal with a lot more hours, and that's like an exchange that you have to think about. What is that salary that you need, and how can you get that at your workplace? And then the last one, benefits, right? I mean, that's real. So I personally, my husband works full time and he gets benefits for our family. So I didn't need benefits. And that actually was a key enabler for me to set up my own consulting company, because we could rely on his benefits. So again, real life stuff, like things you need to consider. If you need benefits, that could steer you in a different direction career-wise. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to touch on, how are we on time? We're good. Is some advice on vetting out prospective employers. Ooh, this is so, so important. I don't know if any of you are going to be interviewing anywhere soon. And this advice is true if you're entering as an associate scientist or if you're entering as a vice president. Vetting out your prospective employer is so, 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 so important. And I have some tips that I've gathered from the speakers and from myself to hopefully help you out and avoid some of the bad placements that can happen. So my first piece of advice is make sure you meet informally with your future peers. So rather than in the conference room, make sure you have the opportunity to go out to lunch or go out to drinks after the interviews, and really get a vibe of what it's like there. How do they talk about their leadership team? What's their stress level? What's their excitement? Make sure that whatever you're feeling from them is how you want to exist. Um, do you want a high pace, high reward environment? That's the opportunity to find out, because people put on, their corporate mask at the office. You got to get them out. You got to get them out, and then you can find out, what the situation is really like. Make sure you really talk to your boss. Your boss is the key to your job, right? They are going to delegate, designate, oversee, micromanage, lift up. They're going to be the person. And oftentimes you hear people go to a job because of the boss, not the company. The boss is your direct boss is as important as vetting out the entire company. And if there are things that are important to you, like, I don't know, maternity policy or mentorship or conference attendance, ask them. I mean, if not now, then when? Just ask the things that you care deeply about. And just make sure that however they answer, you're comfortable with. I think another important thing is to look at the composition of the leadership team and the board. And this can mean male, female. This can mean race. This can also mean, are they scientists, or is there not a single scientist in the leadership and the board? Are there any doctors involved? It really is, you need to think about what you would value in leadership for a company, and understand that everything comes from the top. And if the people at the top, if you don't feel like they're the right mix for what you believe in, chances are the company is not going to reflect what you believe in either, because everything comes from the top. You can't fix it from the bottom. I've tried. It comes from the top, and there's lots of different ways to run companies. You just have to decide if that company looks correct to you. So don't miss out on understanding who the leadership team is and what the board looks like. And then the last thing I would say here, I think this is the last one, yeah, is a lot of companies and even some PIs and institutions, they have like core values, or they have these like pithy statements about what they believe in and how they operate. And it's really easy for them to hire some fancy consultant and come up with those, or that they sat in a room 8 years ago for an hour and came up with them and put them on the wall. Um, they basically don't really mean anything unless you can really identify examples for how these things are actually happening. And that can be tricky, but it could be as overt as asking. But it could also just be listening really carefully and asking questions to try to get to whether these core values are legit, or if they're just something that's put on the wall to look good, which unfortunately can happen quite a lot. Okay, so 4 more quick tips in the last couple minutes here. I do want to leave time for questions or discussion if anyone has anything they want to bring up, but 4 specific things around burnout that I thought were actionable. Pick your path, define who you are, get out there, and don't stay too long. So let's touch on each of these. So pick your path. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but I can't encourage you enough. You need to be proactive in designing your life. Don't just rely on your annual review. Don't rely on the corporate milestones and the things they want you to move into. They may want you to move into a quality role because they don't have that, but is that what you want to do? You really need to make sure you're designing it yourself. And figure out what your strengths are. Everyone has things that they're good at. Not everyone is meant to be a manager. Not everyone is meant to stand at a podium and give fancy talks. Everyone has their strength. And in fact, some of my best employees have been the lifers in the lab that I can always depend on, that have done tremendous amounts to move their field forward. Figure out what you're great at and stick to that. And frankly, if you're not happy, get another job. Just do it. It's not worth it. Life is too short, and you will find another role. I was just talking to someone earlier this week, and she's leaving a role without a new one lined up. And she's like, I can't do it. I can't even look for a new role right now because I'm so bogged down with what's been happening at this one. And I'm like, good for you. Like, that's why we have a bit of savings. Do what you have to do. Like, it's time to move on. It's hard. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of guts, but I implore you, if you're not happy, find another job. I think another important thing here is figure out, we maybe touched on this as well, but define who you are. So you can love your company. You can be, a Googler or whatever, and love who you work for, but you're not your company, you are you. And I think a really tangible way to work on this is your online persona. Make sure that your online persona, I recommend that unless you're required by a PI or an employer otherwise, your online persona and your conference persona should be who you are and what you're good at, not your employer, right? Because your employer is always going to be temporary. You're always going to get a new, unless you're no, even if you're the founder CEO, chances are it's temporary. So I think from a brand perspective, figure out who you are and what is your area of expertise? What is your passion? What is your contribution beyond your corporate overlord? I think that's really important, and I think it gives you a bit more space and comfort if you do get in a situation where you have to move jobs. You're not tied to that identity. That happened to me, and that was really hard. So I highly suggest figuring out your own brand rather than that of who you work for. I think this group is a great example of getting out there. Find organizations like this where you can network with people you wouldn't normally connect with, and you can learn from their experiences. You can even ask questions and say, oh, this has happened to me in my lab. Is this weird? And they could say, yes, that's freaking weird. Or no, that totally happens to me too. Here's how I dealt with it. Those are really valuable interactions. And the key is to get outside of your immediate team, right? Get out of your team, your company, and get in with other organizations, other, conferences, alliances like this. Get to conferences. If your company or your PI doesn't want to send you to at least 1 or 2 meetings a year, then you need to put aside your own personal budget and do it, because your network is the way you will find new jobs, period. It's very hard to find a job from a job board. You need to go to conferences and maintain those relationships. And be tight with those professional societies like this one. And then I think a really important thing, we'll talk more about this, is get mentors. So find those people that you share something with, maybe an experience, a university, some part of your identity matches their identity, or maybe they have a career path you would like to follow. Reach out and just ask for a phone call. I always say yes. I always say yes to a 30-minute phone call if someone reaches out. Chances are they'll say yes to you as well. So get those mentors and make it up to you to reach out to them every 6 months and check in. And those relationships are really super valuable. My last advice here is don't stay too long anywhere ever, period. Don't stay too long. After 5 years, honestly, you have diminishing returns. You're asking the same questions, you're solving the same problems, you're dealing with the same people. This is not a marriage, right? This is a job. And you're going to stagnate. And maybe there's rare cases where there's enough evolution in the role and in the people where you're still learning and you're changing and evolving. But 4 times out of 5, you really need to be moving. And this is probably more of an industry piece of advice. Obviously, if you're a PI, you own your science and it's yours forever, and so you don't need to move around. But if you work for that PI, you really need to think about, do you want to be in their shadow for all 40 years of your career, or do you want to move around and learn if it's not yours? Because it's not. The company's never yours. You're an employee. Don't forget that. And change is super hard. I appreciate that. It's been hard for me. I'm a creature of habit. But change is really healthy and really good. And I would encourage anyone who's pushing 5 years and it's not their work to look around and make sure it's still a place where they're learning. Having spoken to over, I think, almost 20 different women on the webinar, I would say one of the most notable learnings has been that no career path is ever linear. You, every person has a story, a wiggle, something happened. Maybe they bounced between academia and industry, maybe they took some wrong steps. But often those wrong steps actually are the most important steps. I remember a webinar person who said that she went into industry for a few years and she just did not like the approach and the goals and the way things operated. And she went right back into academia, and that gave her context for her academic career to know that she really made the right decision. So sometimes stepping out in the wrong direction actually can really help you know what the right direction is. So don't be scared to do that. Even wrong steps are really helpful. And I think the other thing is to expect that everything will go wrong at some point. It's not going to always be flowers and rainbows and unicorns. Something will go wrong, could be to you, could be to your company. That should be your expectation. That way you won't be so shocked when it happens. And I think in my experience and having spoken to a lot of people, it is still a liability to be a woman, and having a family is a liability. So chances are you'll get tangled up in some messy stuff there. You just got to expect it and talk to people and think about how you're going to handle those situations. These toxic workplaces, they happen. Chances are they're going to happen to you, so might as well be ready, expect it to happen. And hopefully when it does, it won't be such a surprise, and you can navigate it with grace. I will leave you with this final thought, which is I think the most important thing that we can do is mentor up and down. Everyone has the opportunity to mentor others, even a grad student, even an undergrad. There's high school students. For grad students, there's undergrads. There's always someone who wants to be in your shoes. And allocating time for that, I think, is really critical. It gives you the opportunity to reflect on your own experiences. If you're the kind of person it's really hard for you to slow down and write down those goals, if you say yes to a couple of mentorship calls, they're going to ask you those questions, and it's going to force you to slow down and think about it. So I think that the mentors get a lot of value out of it as well. And we sometimes can put on a brave face, and it could seem like, oh, that person always has their stuff together, and it's really easy for them. And the truth is, there's like a lot of hard stuff we deal with, and finding opportunities to talk about them could make your own hard experiences maybe a little less heavy. And maybe if someone had heard about the time that they were sexually harassed and you explained what you did, maybe if they're ever in that situation, then they'll have a reaction ready, as opposed to just being so blindsided by it. So my request to all of you on the call today is take on mentees and look for your own mentors and build that community to sustain you across your career. Okay, so yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field them. You're also welcome to reach out to me. If you want to sign up for the mentorship series, we have 3 more sessions coming up this year. Would love to have some of you join. But yeah, happy to take any questions now. Thanks for participating today.